Can I show you something?
I guess. Why do you have that?
I think it's dying.
It's pink.
I know.
It's a pink frog.
It's Greenpeace. It's my daughter Bunny's pet frog. I was spray painting the interior of the kitchen cabinets last night. And I accidentally sprayed him. Something funny?
No.
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for another episode of Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive, history nerd, WKRP and Cincinnati podcast. I'm Mike Grasso. With me, as always, is Rob McDougall.
Hello, everybody.
Today we have two very anxiously awaited episodes of WKRP in Cincinnati. Both of us have been looking forward to both of these for a very long time. We have Frog Story and Venus and the Man.
All right.
Yeah, Frog Story, Rob, you've been waiting for this one for quite a long time.
This is one of my favorites, yeah.
It is, and you know what? Rewatching it just made it one of my favorites all over again, too. Before we get into Frog Story and Venus and the Man, we have a guest host to introduce today.
Yes.
I believe when Lenore came on, you called her one of your oldest friends, and our guest today is one of my oldest friends, and someone whose personal, professional, and academic experience is really pertinent to both of these episodes. So it was a perfect fit, and I'm very glad and very pleased to introduce Mandy Leetch to Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I've been listening for a while.
Excellent. Very good.
Welcome, Mandy. It's great to have you here. Thank you for doing this.
I feel like the first thing I should say about myself is that I was born at the tail end of 1981. And so this is...
Oh yeah, sure, show off, whatever. This is a post about that.
So the KRP experience is not anything that I had anything to do with until today when I watched the episodes with Mike a little bit earlier.
Wow.
So I'll be looking at this with some really fresh eyes, which is interesting and exciting.
I can tell you've been listening to the podcast because you anticipated our very first question of a guest host, which is always to ask them how they came to WKRP. And for you, it was about 4:30 this afternoon. So that's great. So let's start off, first of all, Mandy, by talking about why you are uniquely qualified to talk about an episode about...
Given that you've never seen the show before.
Given that, yes, exactly. This is one of the reasons why I invited Mandy on, Rob, is because even though she was born in 1981 and she is a Reagan baby, very pleased to have her on because the first episode, Frog Story, has to do with environmentalism and really relationships between fathers and daughters and, you know, parents and children. And Mandy, you have a lot of experience in all of these areas because not only have you worked with kids, not only have you worked with them professionally, but you're also currently a graduate researcher in ecopsychological pedagogy.
That's correct. So I'm going to explain what ecopsychology is because I feel like most people are not going to be familiar. Ecopsychology is a form of psychology based on the idea of interbeing, the idea that everything is complexly interwoven from the biological level through to the cosmic level. Our psychological makeup is really based on this interconnection that we have with the entirety of the cosmos. And so when we look at the world and the state that it's in right now, we are dealing with a very human sickness. We treat the earth the way that we do because we as a species have things going on inside of ourselves. And there's this interplay between the way we treat ourselves and the way that we treat the living earth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's some pretty heavy shit. I will tell you, I hang out with Mandy a lot, and a lot of it is really, really heavy shit.
That's the ecopsychology part. And then the pedagogy is that I want to teach educators how to talk to people about these ideas. And a lot of that has to do with metaphor, which has to do with the second episode.
Yes. Yeah,
of
definitely.
course.
The pedagogy part definitely affects Venus and the Man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So we have, I mean, there's a little bit of pedagogy here. Kids in death is
Yeah.
an interesting topic, and kids and animals. Yeah.
And my undergraduate research is in death, so that's another place where it all lines up. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with kids all across the developmental spectrum, and have some interesting experiences working with kids and death of pets in particular. So we'll get to that too. Yeah.
So you're full of fun stories.
Oh my gosh. I am the meme that says I won't get political and then me after 2 beers.
So we've talked now that we've talked a little bit about why you're qualified for these episodes, even that you are a borderline millennial. I'm going to say that because I know we've talked about this in the past, and I've had my problems with assigning people their proper generations. But let's concede the fact that you are a borderline Gen X or millennial. You missed out on a lot of these 1970s sitcoms that Rob and I have talked a lot about on the podcast.
That's correct. So when Mike and I looked over a list to see what 70s sitcoms I had really watched, and there were only like 3 of them. It was like Mork and Mindy, Taxi.
Late 70s sitcoms, yeah.
And I don't remember what the other one was, but
Probably MASH.
Yeah, no, it was MASH, and I didn't even watch MASH as a kid. I watched MASH as a college student when I was cutting class. I would watch MASH because that's what everybody does when they're cutting class.
It's educational.
Yeah. But I have, so it's a weird pocket too, because I would watch like Get Smart and F Troop and all of these old, like Dick Van Dyke Show with my dad, and then none of the 70s shows. And then I really started to become aware of television around like watching Murphy Brown with my mom is sort of where we...
Late 80s,
Yeah.
early 90s kind of, yeah. So what kind of role did TV play in your house? I mean, was it on all the time, like Bunny said in the last episode that she was in?
There was a lot of TV in my house, but there's also a lot of people in my house. So I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. My parents were both there. My grandparents lived next door in the duplex, and across the street was my mom's best friend, her sister, and their 3 daughters. And so there was a lot of coming and going. There was a lot of TV on, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of sitting and watching the television. Which also might be why I have ADHD, but...
To me, the archetypal period in which I would watch WKRP would be in syndication. But the first time I watched it, after school, maybe high school or middle school, like that sort of block of reruns from 4 p.m. to, before dinner time to 6 p.m. So you're in high school or, 9th grade after school. Are you watching TV or what are you watching?
You don't want my answers.
I totally want your answer.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, well, it's a good choice. Of course, it makes me feel old, but it's a good choice.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked a little bit about the sort of generationality of this, and like you had more choices in TV too, because you had, again, when you were young, there was a full cable spectrum to be seen, and there was a lot, the children's and sort of young adult programming.
So I'm really at this interesting point where it sort of like exploded out, because I remember having to wait for Cartoon Express to be able to see cartoons on TV. And then I remember shortly thereafter having cartoons everywhere all the time.
Given that you didn't watch a lot of 1970s sitcoms, what did you notice about WKRP that sort of like differed from the 90s sitcoms?
So I noticed so many things right away. Like the first thing that I noticed was like the blocking in the moving camera, because like you really lost a lot of that where everything sort of became thick set, and the blocking became a little bit more of a standardized format where everything had like the front lip removed, and it was so like they had some creative angles and some really cramped sets and some really it's very interesting.
I think it's the same number of cameras, but I think you're right. They
like move them. It's like boom, boom.
Yeah,
and there's
more
not nearly as much of that in sitcoms later. It's really very fixed. So the other thing that I found really interesting was the pacing. The bits are really long, and then the first time there was a break, I was like, "Is that the first commercial?"
Yeah. They have 2 commercial breaks, basically. Yeah. There's 3 acts, and there's 2 commercial breaks, and like there are more commercials in a 90s sitcom. They're long. The breaks are longer, and I think there's one more of them usually. So I think that's. But
even even separate from the act breaks, the commercial breaks, yeah, the pacing is different. We often, the scenes are longer.
they really chew a bit.
Yeah.
Like they're doing it for a while.
Yeah.
I feel like as you move into like late 80s and 90s, you see these really clean sets.
Yeah.
Where everything is like impeccable. And that is the opposite of what's happening here. And it's really cluttered and it's really cramped. And I think that it creates a great atmosphere. It tells you exactly where you are really quickly, but it's also sort of interesting and confusing for that sort of format of TV, at least for me, because it is so much information and it's in such a small space.
And it's on crappy video, too.
Yeah.
So you can't see all the details that you really want to see, which we've run into a few times trying to freeze frame things and getting, what is that poster behind Herb? Like, what is that bumper sticker from? That kind of thing.
Yeah, our 90s and aughts sitcoms, maybe more aspirational. So, like, the Friends have this gorgeous apartment. And even workplace sitcoms, it's like this, beautiful, huge, open concept architecture firm or something like that. And
Right.
instead of this dingy bullpen and the storage room that features heavily in Venus and the Man and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that the point about it being aspirational makes so much sense too, because you've got to be able to sell the lifestyle and the haircuts and the everything that's going to make you into Rachel.
Yeah.
Mr. Carlson wants me to find out why you're throwing coffee pots around the lobby this morning.
I have a sick frog on my hands, Andy.
Oh, well, that explains it.
You want to see him?
Hey, why not? I like to have as much fun as the next guy.
Well, he's pink, Andy. So don't look at him and tell me he's pink because I've already told you he's pink, okay? I accidentally spray painted him. There he is.
What's his name?
Greenpeace.
Looks like pink peas.
My daughter named him after the people who, go around saving little baby seals and whales and stuff. I mean, she's just a little kid, but she's an environmentalist.
I think that's wonderful, Herb.
Well, now you see how bad this is going to look? I mean, I've almost killed this innocent product of nature with toxic chemicals. My daughter's going to hate me forever.
Well, he hasn't croaked yet, Herb. Give him time. I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, our first episode is Frog Story, a very classic, a problem gets toted around the station to every single one of the cast members of WKRP. In this case, the thing that's getting toted around is literally getting toted around because it's a box with a spray-painted frog in it. And this frog has been accidentally spray-painted by Herb as he was working on the kitchen cabinets. We can talk about the plausibility of that particular scenario as we get through this episode. But it's Herb's daughter Bunny's pet frog named Greenpeace, who has been painted bright pink, which is probably very believable now that I think about it. Kitchen cabinets being painted bright pink around 1980, 81.
Sure.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well,
yeah.
my mom told us that she painted her office in the Parliament buildings bright pink back in 1969.
The metaphor of a frog being spray painted of all things bright pink
The CFCs and the spray paint.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Gets exploded out when we find out that the frog's name is Greenpeace and Bunny named the frog Greenpeace because she's a budding environmentalist. And so there's lots of beautiful threads in this episode. The trust between fathers and daughters as Herb just tries to get the frog to a vet, ends up taking him to a podiatrist who's in the Flim building.
Well, and he asks everybody in the station if they know how to get paint off a frog.
Yeah, I guess that's the way it gets toted around, isn't it? It's sort of like, can you solve this problem for me? And of course, no one can solve the problem.
But everyone has a good laugh at his expense, yeah.
More at the frog's expense, which I want to talk about as we get into talking about the episode. But it all culminates in a scene, and we'll talk about this in a bit. The frog does die. It's Chekhov's frog. If there's a frog introduced in the first act and it's been spray painted pink, it's going to die by the end of the first act. It's a very famous literary term.
Either that or it's going to come out and be a glam, fabulous frog.
And so, Herb has to decide what to do. The classic sort of, child pet scenario. Do you buy a new pet that looks exactly like the old one, or do you have the talk about pets dying? And we get to actually have both of them in this episode, which is kind of interesting. So, Rob, we'll start with you. What did you think of Frog Story after all this hype and all this talking about it?
Oh, I love this episode. I think, if you ask me what my two favorite episodes of WKRP are, I might pick Fish Story and Frog Story just as a nice paired set, both because of the names of the episodes, but because they are the two extremes of what the show does really well. So Fish Story is the totally zany, ridiculous visual gags episode, and then this is this kind of pure, gentle, small-scale character comedy. The character takes a problem to each person, and each person responds to it in a different, funny way. So I love that aspect of it. And then, I do find, especially now as a dad, but even I always like this episode. I find what passes between Herb and Bunny at the end very touching and very sweet. So it has heart in addition to being very funny and being, just absurd enough a situation. It's a very WKRP-esque situation, the absurdity of, he spray painted a frog pink.
Yeah, and Herb's anxiety throughout those first, that first act and a half, basically, how do I solve this problem? I did something wrong. The Herb of season 1 might not have been this conscious of his responsibility to his daughter to try and, solve this problem that he created. And by season 3, he's a little bit more fleshed out, and he's Frank Bonner. We've talked about it again and again. Great comic timing and physical comedy. And, between the moving the box with the frog in it around and throwing the coffee pot full of hot water onto the wall and all this other stuff, Frank Bonner conveys a lot of anxiety and worry about what he's going to do to address this issue with the frog and his daughter.
But he's very restrained. I would say that Bonner is restrained in this episode because he's of course can go off and do these really broad big bits, and often some of the funniest parts in the episode are the way other people bounce off him. And so, when even, Gary Sandy gets to be funny, I thought he was funny. He comes in eating the pear and he's like, you want to see? Hey, I like to have as much fun as the next guy. Like it's actually, I think it's very generous of Frank Bonner to let Gary Sandy be funny in a scene.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Mandy, what did you think of Frog Story?
So like I said, this was my introduction to KRP, and it was less cringeworthy than I had sort of steeled myself for. I was really ready for something dealing with environmental issues to be sort of just poorly done and to have a lot of I've heard a lot of the critiques that you guys have, and I understand where there's so many places where they aren't handling things well, but then they handled things so much better than I had been prepared to.
Good.
The other thing is I thought that this was a great introduction to these characters. These are people who at this point I've heard a ton about from listening to the podcast, but I haven't actually met. And I mean, I guess this is part of doing a really successful sitcom, is that you have to have each episode be a great way to meet the characters, or you're not going to get new viewers.
In that day and age, definitely, yeah.
And so getting to go through and get sort of these tastes of their personality was really great, and having Venus was very barely in this episode, but he was very much like a walking #white people meme.
That happens a lot in KRP, as you've probably heard. Yeah, I think the other thing the other character you don't get a lot of in these two episodes is the big guy, which is sad because, as Rob and I have talked about, we've both gotten a huge newfound respect for Arthur. His little bit in this episode
he
is
kind of
cute.
He has a nice little bit.
Yeah,
I wanted him to be a little bit more Teddy Roosevelt Republican conservationist in his talking about frogs. They're an important part of the ecosystem. Without frogs, you couldn't have fish or something like that, But he does.
He's like, right? He's like, I like frogs. Frogs are frogs, right?
Yeah. Who doesn't like frogs?
They don't really do anything for society, but they don't really do anything against it either.
They don't cause a lot of problems.
They don't cause a lot of problems, right? Yeah.
This morning, I think I'm dying. All anybody around here can think about is this frog, the pink frog. I'm a human being, It's like in the movies, though. You can waste the entire Confederate Army. Nobody cares. 395,000 guys deader than doornails. But you kill one collie, everybody collapses in grief.
This episode, for me, just worked on every level, other than the glee that a lot of the jokes took with the whole animal cruelty thing. It actually kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now, again...
More so than tossing turkeys out of a helicopter?
Yes. And it's because of what Johnny said. You remember what Johnny said about you can have 350,000 Confederates die in a movie, but one collie dies, and all of a sudden, everybody cares.
Oh, so it's not just frogs dying, it's Greenpeace dying.
It's Greenpeace, exactly. It's Bunny's frog, and it's this, and it's the way he got sprayed, and it's the way Herb is, again, fretting about it. And, you know, all I could think of when Johnny told that story about, you know, how people care about animals more than humans was doesthedogdie.com, you know, that site where it warns you in a movie if the dog is going to die.
This is a thing. I didn't know about it, but it's that's a very useful. Sure.
It is.
Yeah, it is. And I think that Jenny and I, my wife Jenny and I, check that site before we watch almost every movie because neither of us can handle if the dog dies. But Johnny's got a point. I mean, this ties back into the environmentalism stuff. If you've got a cute baby seal on the poster,
People will pay attention.
People will pay attention, exactly.
It actually, so it makes me think, C.S. Lewis, when he was talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, he said that he made Aslan a lion because nobody can care about a human Jesus, but children can connect with a lion.
Ooh, ouch. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
that's good. Yeah.
You know, this may be part of what your work is and you're talking about, Mandy, but that can backfire too. Like I think, you know, there's lots of reasons to care about global warming other than polar bears.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And ecopsychology gives us a way to make everything that's happening personal, right? And that's how you make it effective for people, is to say that, well, it's happening inside of you as well as it's happening out in the environment. Because so many of the biggest issues that we need to worry about, ocean acidification, topsoil erosion. There's no adorable face. You can't make them sexy. There's nothing that you can do to make these easily identifiable anthropomorphized issues. They're something that is so foreign and abstract that people are looking for ways to divest their responsibility to them. And so, yes, exactly. Yeah. It has this weird interplay. And that's why making it personal and internalized is so important, is because humans are very narrow focus of how to think about things.
I think I'm gonna go eat some dinner. Okay? Okay. That's not really Greenpeace.
I
know. Well, we'll bury Greenpeace. Okay? I mean, we'll bury him in the backyard, and we can have him here with us, and we can just honor him all the time. Okay?
Hello, new frog. Welcome to my room. I think you're gonna like it here. But stay away from my daddy.
The environmental level, I think it's really interesting. I sort of connected, especially watching this time, with the Herb and Bunny, the final scene, you know, just on the level of a parent and thinking about kids and death, which is a, you know, a related set of issues, right? And the sort of like, you know, what do kids think about death? When are they ready to think about death? You know, some people say that, you know, one of the reasons that kids have pets is to rehearse death, right?
Well, and one of our cultural issues is our intense xenophobia. We are scared of death. We don't talk about it. We don't address it. It isn't part of life. It's something that's different and separate from us. And that creates all of these problems because we don't have this thread connecting what we do to these death effects.
Yeah, sure.
Did you find it interesting that it was Jennifer and Bailey both who had the sort of healthiest and kind of most... They both had this ability to kind of talk about death in a
mature and responsible
way.
Yeah.
I mean, they both came at it from slightly different angles.
What do you think I ought to tell my daughter?
Well, I think you ought to tell her the truth. What else can you do?
Andy's right, Herb. Tell her the truth. The frog is dead, and death is the logical, unavoidable conclusion to all things.
You know, Herb, I guess we all think about death. I went to the beach this summer and I watched the waves. Now, a wave is a wave, but only for a second, and then it's over. But the water that makes the wave continues to exist. It's just not a wave anymore.
That's a lovely thought.
Thank you.
Well, it's getting pretty heavy for me around here. I think I'll just go on home.
Herbert?
Mm-hmm.
Tell the truth.
Right.
Bailey's was a little bit more California, hippie kind of, as you were talking about.
Let me
Rob.
paraphrase Alan Watts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's
exactly.
connected. The waves.
Jennifer was very sort of like, it's that backwoods rock throw West Virginia, take care of the, family kind of way. Like, death is just is an essential part of life. And for her, it's very matter of fact.
I really loved that she said that specifically. Like, I also loved her handling of the phone call, because Bunny calls to talk to Herb, and she's like, she doesn't lie to her. She says, "Oh, honey, I don't know."
Yeah. Yeah. She
and
does.
that's, I think in a sitcom, it would be very easy. And in a real life situation, it'd be very easy to lie to a little girl and say, "Oh, he's fine," and then make it dad's problem later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just back one step. Bailey's little speech about the waves. I felt like maybe we were getting a little bit of Jan Smithers coming through there, right? Because as we know, Jan is a California girl and
got into transcendental meditation around this time, and ended up becoming retreating from Hollywood and everything to concentrate on that kind of stuff. And it does. Absolutely. The reaction shot, as you said in the notes, Rob. I mean and again, it was all the men. They were just like, "Huh,
I'll just gaping at what's coming out of her mouth." Yeah. What I wanted to mention, I don't know if you guys ever read this, but it's 10 years ago now. Adam Gopnik had a lovely piece in the New Yorker called Death of a Fish. And it's about his daughter's, goldfish, or it's not actually a goldfish. It's like,
a betta.
Yeah. And, same thing. The fish dies. It gets stuck in the little plastic castle and it dies. And, they panic. They don't know what to do. And they pull what they call the full Vertigo, referring to the movie Vertigo, where Kim Novak gets replaced by another Kim Novak. This whole sort of like attempting to swap out the fish and fool, just as Herb attempts to do. And Gopnik's his sister is Alison Gopnik, who studies like kids' philosophy and like what kids think of the world and how they understand the world at different ages. Oh. She wrote a neat book called The Philosophical Baby, or The Baby Philosopher, or something. And so it's a great little piece that talks through it maps almost exactly onto what Herb tries to do with Bunny. Like, first he tries to deceive her, and then she clearly sees through it. At the end she seems to accept it and makes friends with the new frog. But it's very interesting. And I think, at different ages, kids have kind of different, just as you were saying, that the way they think about Earth and the environment is different. The way they think about life and vitality and that sort of thing is different.
This seems like a good time for the Newt story.
Yeah, I have 2 animal death stories from the same.
Bring it.
Yeah. So I did an internship.
This episode's a lot of laughs, guys.
These are pretty funny, actually.
Okay.
So I did an internship with a 3rd grade classroom, and I was there for 2 months, working almost full time. Really got to know the kids. It was really fun. We had a lot of different classroom pets. We had a mouse, a tarantula, some fish, and we had a fire-bellied newt. And one day we come back in from doing an activity, so we spread back out into the classroom, and the newt is ghost white, dead, and belly up.
Poor newt.
Except that there is some strange coloration on his belly, which has been turned red somehow. Come to find out that one of the kids from the classroom is missing. So we go looking for her, and we find her in the bathroom, and she's crying and crying, and she says she's crying because the newt is dead. And then very slowly it comes out that she's not crying because the newt is dead. She is crying because she killed the newt.
Oh.
Yeah, but what happened was, because it was a fire-bellied newt, she thought that his belly wasn't red enough, and so she got a red marker and picked up the newt and colored his belly red. And because it breathes through its skin, it had a toxic reaction to the marker and died right there.
This is exactly like this episode. Colored the newt.
Yeah.
It's eerily close to this episode, yeah.
And so what ensued then was a process of talking with the classroom and having to deal with the group's grieving and trying to have a little funeral, and it being the middle of winter and us not being able to dig into the playground dirt at all. So we've got it buried in a little mound because that's all that we could manage. And this was my first experience of working with these kids and the idea of death. This was well before I had the chops to handle any of this. I'm 18 years old doing my first student teaching, and I'm like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing here. The second one, so there's this book from 1980, which is called Stone Fox. And Stone Fox is a book about a dog race. And there is this boy, and he has one dog, and he is in this dog race to try and save his grandpa's farm. And so,
like a sled dog race.
Yeah. Sorry, not like greyhound racing,
Yeah.
like a mini Iditarod. So it's this beautiful book about a boy and his dog, and you've got all of this wonderful bonding, and I'm reading it aloud to the kids, and we're getting to the end. And what happens at the end is that the dog's heart explodes, and it dies just before the finish line.
Oh.
And the Native American man who normally wins the race stops all the other racers so that the kid can pick up his dog and carry it across the finish line. And I look up, and my third grade class is bawling. Every single one of them is just like a mess. And I'm not prepared or ready. I have not yet done my thesis on death and dying. And so, like, I go and get the teacher, and I'm like, what do I do? And he's like, just ask them if they have any pets.
Good.
Yeah.
And so we ended up having a conversation with them where, like, lots of them have been through the experience of losing pets or losing older relatives at that age even. And their processing about it is really interesting and really complex. One of the things about literature is that when you're really little, you don't cry about the things that you read because you don't identify with them. And then as you build life experience, you have more heartbreak to identify with the story. And so to have this young class have this, like, intense emotional reverberation and response shows you, like, how sophisticated they are about these ideas already.
Yeah. Animals are proxies for kids in a powerful way, right? People have looked at, like, anthropomorphizing and that there's a way in which anthropomorphized animals are more universal than human beings for kids.
Yeah.
So, like the great, magnificent book that makes every kid cry, Charlotte's Web. Like, Charlotte is a spider, and the fact that, like, so many children have the experience of, like, bawling their eyes out for a spider is I think really sort of powerful and impressive. In this episode, the podiatrist Dr. Hunnestead says, Herb, someone's got to say this to you. It's just a frog, but that's exactly the wrong way around. It's because it's a frog that,
Yeah, absolutely. It is easier to identify with a completely different creature than it is to identify with a human who is slightly different from you.
Oh, wow. Jesus.
Have you had a recent flu shot? I did have a flu shot about 2 months ago.
Do you drink tap water?
Of course I drink tap water. What are you trying to say to me, doctor? Please tell me what you mean.
What I mean. What I am saying, Mrs. Kramer, is that you are shrinking from a combination of the tap water, the flu shot, the perfume, the glue, the solvent, your bubble bath, talcum powder, shampoo, hair conditioner, setting lotion, hand lotion, mouthwash, hairspray, breath spray, feminine hygiene spray, deodorant, toothpaste, detergent, eye drops, nose drops, hair coloring, diet soda, birth control pills, and smog, set off by an imbalance already present in your system.
So as we said earlier, this was the heyday of the ecology movement that started in the sort of aftermath of the late 60s. The first Earth Day was in 1970. Greenpeace itself was founded in 1971. A child who grew up in the 70s is going to be, again, like I said earlier, really conscious of this stuff. And I think I was at an early age. Do either of you remember the movie that Lily Tomlin did, The Incredible Shrinking Woman?
I didn't.
I remember that.
So the concept of it was that Lily Tomlin plays a housewife to Charles Grodin, I think it was. And she's surrounded by all of these, like, brightly colored consumer products, detergents and perfumes and everything else. And much like the 1950s Incredible Shrinking Man was about the dangers of, like, radiation causing someone to shrink, this late 70s, early 80s film it's all of these consumer products that cause Lily Tomlin to start shrinking. And I was horrified by this movie as a kid. It's a consumer satire of that sort of ilk from that period. But for a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old watching this and thinking all those friendly looking boxes of like breakfast cereal and detergent are actually doing something bad to you is like, whoa, oh my God, this is all the stuff that I love to look at in the grocery store, and it's gonna make me shrink down and turn into something that just disappears. Like it was really, really profoundly frightening for me. And again, looking at it now with the benefit of hindsight, it's a really powerful satire.
Well, it's interesting because consumerization is a process of enclosure that makes everything smaller, right? So the sense of interbeing is the most expansive self-form that you can have. And then what we do is we put progressively smaller enclosures around the idea of the self. And so the smallest self that you can have is the one that's not involved in the social commons at all, and instead gets all of your everything that you need through consumerism.
Wow.
Folks, if you can't see Mike, but he did, while Mandy was saying that, looked exactly like the big guy and Andy while Bailey was dropping her California wisdom on them.
Energy is becoming one of our country's greatest concerns. If we don't start working on energy conservation, there may not be enough energy to go around by the time I'm a parent. From Goring to learn about how we can solve some of our problems through alternative energy sources. You can learn more about energy too. Call your county cooperative extension service for more information. Conserving energy is everyone's responsibility. Call 4-H to find out how you can do your part.
The stuff that I was aware of in the late 70s, I just wrote a piece about this for a blog, We Are the Mutants, that I'm an editor of. And the late 70s, there was the energy crisis going on. And like, there were a lot of PSAs out there about like, we've got to preserve, these precious reserves of energy so that we'll have enough to get us through the next 30, 40, 50 years when I grow up. And like, there was a sense...
Disheartening.
It is. That's the way they posed it, though. It was a self-interested kind of like focus.
Oh, I mean, from right now, it's disheartening. We've been talking about this for a very, very long time with a lot of clarity.
The other thing that, the fact that the frog is named Greenpeace, of course, it's a pun on frogs being green and him being painted pink. Although, when you see the dead frog, the one moment when you see the dead frog, he's not pink enough.
It's really frustrating.
That seems like a very simple fix to paint that rubber frog pink.
To send that down to props.
Yeah.
Done.
It's part of the threadbareness of the set decoration. Exactly. Yeah.
I guess.
No, but nobody had any pink nail polish they could throw on that. Like somebody had to have something.
Lonnie could have given a little bit of her. Yeah, exactly.
But I was just going to say Greenpeace. Of course, this ties this, of course, to a specifically 70s, 80s environmentalism. A kind of activist, almost eco-vigilante, sort of phenomenon that Greenpeace starts in the late 60s, right? So somebody told me that you could go to any bar in Vancouver and meet somebody who tells you that he was one of the founders of Greenpeace. But, that these, basically, both Canadian and American sort of, hippie activists decided to, it started out as an anti-nuclear, there's nuclear testing in Alaska that they were trying to stop, but then, got into, trying to stop, whaling vessels and pirate fishing vessels and that kind of thing, this sort of taking active action, around the globe, to protect the environment. And that seems like, a product of this moment, although it certainly continues.
I think it's interesting because I think that Greenpeace remains sort of a product of that moment because they don't apply robust enough complexity thinking to their action.
Yeah.
And so a couple of years ago, they did an action on the Nazca lines. Is that the
ones in Peru?
The ones you can see from space.
Yeah, the ones that the ancient aliens made.
The aliens ones.
That you can see from space. So they did an action where they went and they moved some stuff and made some permanent changes to this Neolithic, testament to our survival, and they just shat all over it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just, to tie this to another one of our hobby horses sort of generational stuff, I think there's something about, obviously that kind of activism, grows out of 60s activism, in other contexts, civil rights, anti-Vietnam activism. And it probably has some of the best and the worst qualities of that. That it's extremely well-meaning, but there's a kind of hubris to it.
There's a lot of paternalism inside of this particular type of activism, too, because they like to go into marginalized areas where there's a lot of environmental damage. And those are usually areas where there are people who are struggling as well. And then they use Northern ethics to prioritize the environmental action over the local populations. And so...
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Eco-justice education tries to resolve that because the optimal solutions will hurt capitalism but help people and planet. But the problem is that everybody's always trying to solve the problem either for people and capitalism or for planet and capitalism, as opposed to for people and planet without...
without capitalism? Sure. I think that, the danger of it is part of the appeal.
Oh, yeah.
You get a very specific type of activist involved with this.
Right. You're a real radical if you're sort of putting your body on the line. To bring this back to sitcoms, a story that I found really interesting over the last year or so is there's a group called Sea Shepherd, which grows out of Greenpeace. They're kind of eco-vigilantes that try and stop pirate fishing vessels. And last year, I think they pursued and even sunk. They pursued these pirate fishing vessels, and then the fishermen who were maybe African, it was maybe an African fishing vessel or something like that, sunk the ship rather than give it up. But the sitcom connection is that the two Sea Shepherd ships that were pursuing them were the SS Bob Barker and the SS Sam Simon. Bob Barker, of course, is the longtime host of The Price is Right, and Sam Simon is one of the creators of The Simpsons. And Sam Simon, after creating The Simpsons, walked away from it, but continued to get royalties every single time The Simpsons was aired anywhere. And Bob Barker gets royalties every single time The Price is Right is aired anywhere. And both of them are big animal rights activists, PETA supporters, Greenpeace supporters, and so they both gave tons of money to these groups. In fact, Sam Simon was dying of cancer and kind of went out of his way he was trying to spend all his money before he died. But of course, every 30 seconds, he'd get a new royalty check from The Simpsons. So it was really hard. Tons of money. So anyway, but I was just amused as a sitcom lover of the image of these, Somali pirates being pursued around the globe by Sam Simon and Bob Barker.
Oh, God.
All right. We're finally going to stop those corporate pigs from dumping that nuclear waste.
Oh, no, our boat is sinking.
It was I, you fools. The man you trusted isn't wavy gravy at all. And all this time I've been smoking harmless tobacco.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention is that there's kind of a almost but not quite direct connection between Greenpeace and eco-psychology, because eco-psychology is sort of a response to this fear-based environmentalism, where the way that you get people to care about the environment is to be terrified that it's dying. And
so timely with that Great Barrier Reef story that was just in the news this week as we're recording.
The death of the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah. And while that might make people have an emotional response in the moment, figures show us that it doesn't make people make change. And sometimes it actually makes things worse because people start to feel disempowered and like they can't make change because everything's falling apart around them. And so the way that we communicate about environmentalism becomes really important. And a lot of what Les was doing in his little factoids is a better example of how to do environmental communication.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And finally, did you know that only a miraculous set of circumstances makes life here on Earth possible? For instance, the planet's size is just exactly right to hold our atmosphere. The atmosphere contains just enough oxygen to support life. And our distance from the sun is just perfect for the right temperature. Should there be even a trivial change in any of these conditions, all life here on Earth would most certainly be obliterated in a matter of milliseconds. This is Les Nessman saying good day, and may the good news be yours.
Yeah, that's a little almost C-plot where Les has started to introduce these interesting human facts to his newscasts. And, they have to do with how precious life on Earth is, because if we were any further away from the sun or any closer, or the planet was a different size, all life on Earth would be extinguished almost immediately in a millisecond. And yeah, you're right. That is a, nobody wants him to do these bits, but it reminds you of how delicate a balance everything on Earth is, but it does it in a very gentle way.
Oh, Venus, I got trouble at home.
What's wrong?
My little boy Arnold, he's just 16, and now he's telling me, he says he's gonna quit school. Just like that. He told me yesterday.
Sorry, Cora.
Venus, I don't work like I do for him to do something like that. I was for 7 years now, saving for his college. And now he's not even going to graduate from high school?
Well, you know how kids are these days. They need time to find themselves.
Find themselves? I can't find it. Nobody can. He's always gone, running the streets with his friends, messing all kinds of stuff.
Well, you tell him if he doesn't shape up, I'll come over to that house and I'll go upside his head.
I wish you would do that.
Yeah, and I would, too.
Yeah, it'd be good for him to talk to somebody like you. A person who's made something of themselves.
Well, you send him up here. I'll talk to him.
Oh, Venus, would you?
Sure.
Well, our second episode this time around is Venus and the Man. And this is a very well-known, well-remembered episode in which the station's cleaning woman, who we've never met before, but she's obviously friends with Venus. She comes by while he's in the booth late at night and asks him to have a talk with her son, Arnold, who is a teenager, involved in a street gang and thinking about dropping out of high school. Venus does, but Arnold ends up being a lot bigger and tougher and scarier than Venus had maybe anticipated. And there's some classic, I use that word advisedly, WKRP guy being scared of other guy comedy. But it culminates in a scene that I think, one of the really memorable scenes that everybody remembers from WKRP, where Venus describes the atom. He bets Arnold that in 2 minutes he can teach him the workings of the atom, and he does so by drawing an analogy to gangs circling around a round neighborhood. And this is and he does in fact teach him and convinces him to go back to school. What'd you think of Venus and the Man?
Well, so when Mike and I were watched this, he asked me if I felt like it was too glib. And it's because there's a lot of stuff that's really sort of like problematic and throwaway at the beginning. And sort of my response was that the first half is perhaps too glib, but the second half is so important and effective that it sort of erases that and makes it so that it can't. Nothing can. There's a lot of problems that we're going to need to talk about as we get into it. But the way that Venus talks about teaching and talks about teaching Black youth and talks about sharing information and about taking information that is belongs to you is just really powerful. And the use of metaphor in education is something that is really important to me and to my research. And so watching him watching him go into the place where someone resides and draw them to his perspective is just really powerful, effective, and beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that's why, people remember, they don't remember the whole episode. I didn't remember the whole episode, but people remember Venus. In fact, often when you see this episode listed, the title is given wrong as Venus teaches the atom or Venus explains the atom. It's so memorable that people can't believe that that's not the name of the episode.
Right.
So to talk about that first half of the episode that you were talking about, we meet Cora, the station cleaning lady, and we have this kind of conversation between Cora and Venus that is, it's kind of steeped in, I would say, some stereotypes.
I wrote a note, which is who are the writers? Because now in 2016, if you're going to write Black culture that way, you better be inside of Black culture.
Yeah. The writer of this episode is the show creator, Hugh Wilson. Now, I've read in the Castle book that he worked with Tim Reed on this, but Tim Reed, the actor who plays Venus Flytrap, did not get a writing credit for it. It's entirely credited to Hugh Wilson. Now, Hugh Wilson and Tim Reed worked together on a lot of the episodes that we've talked about that have done that have done justice to Venus, like Who is Gordon Sims, and in other episodes, Tim Reed has gotten writing credits to write his character, but this one's all Hugh Wilson.
And then they went on to do Frank's Place, of course, which is, although, very hard to find, we haven't seen it, but it's remembered by people as being, for its time, one of the smartest shows about race.
And Hugh Wilson is a Southern white man. And, again, I think in a lot of ways, WKRP for him, from what I've read in some of the interviews, was a learning experience for him. And I think this episode is part of that learning experience for him. Having a single mother, but there's a contrast here because we've heard about Venus. Venus had a very large non-nuclear family. He had grandparents who he's referenced in the past. He had a very strong family structure, and he is a college graduate. One of the first things Cora asks him is, did you graduate high school?
Those two things are very tightly correlated.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're absolutely correlated. And so Venus is coming at Cora as this authority figure. Not only did he go to college, but he went to teaching college. And so Cora has now discovered somebody who can help her son make something of himself. And Cora puts it in terms of, I've sacrificed for my son. I want him to go to college, and he is not doing what I have spent all this time working on.
In the same conversation, however, she also calls him big, tricky, and bad.
Yeah. Well, that's setting up. That's setting up some of this unfortunate. I guess they thought. I want to talk about the casting of Arnold.
So at the present moment where we have this intensified racial tension in America, we have to look really closely at the adultification of black men.
Yes.
And so adultification of black boys, and black girls. So you have children who are being sexualized and turned into super predators. Yeah. And you have a 12-year-old boy who is shot and then called a man on news reports. And this is, endemic. It's part of the cultural problem. And then we rewind.
Right. And police making claims like that they feared for their life because he was so ferocious, so big. Whatever.
And they're 16 years old. They're kids. They're just kids. And if they were a white kid, they would just be seen as a kid, but they don't have this luxury.
And then how do they cast Arnold, who it says right in the dialogue that he is 16 years old?
Yeah.
They cast a 32-year-old man. We looked it up. He's 32 years old, and he is big and strong and tough and looks 40.
Yeah. Looks older than his actual years and looks much older than what the show is portraying him as.
I think that's so unfortunate. I think that, for all the reasons you're saying, that there's that how destructive that imagery is. Yeah. But also I just think that everything that follows would play so much better if he looked plausibly 16. And he can still be tough, and he can still be angry, and he can still even be a little bit scary. If you don't think that teenagers are scary to middle-aged people.
You're not 30 if you don't think teenagers are a little bit scary.
Exactly. He can still be scary, but then he's also vulnerable. And so many, and
Venus could be a mentor. He can look like a mentor next to him instead of two adult black men talking to each other. Yeah.
And his agony about, he doesn't want to seem dumb, and he wants to feel smart. And, the script you're meant to think that he is smart.
Yes.
But because he's played by a 32-year-old man, it just all seems really remedial, right? And
that's some dangerous ground to be treading on. Yeah.
Dangerous ground to play. And then, but most of all, of course, Cora is frightened for him. And black boys are vulnerable. Boy, if we didn't know that, a few years ago, boy, we know that now. I mean, that's what's underneath her fears, right? And so, but making him into
a caricature, really, right? Is we don't have something
physically a caricature. Yeah.
And that's an interesting point too, because when we talk a little bit later about the Adam scene, the writing in it is good, and he delivers it really well in a lot of cases. But it's just the fact that he is this much older.
Yeah. So the actor who plays Arnold, Kenny Long, he, as you were saying, Mandy, not to jump too far ahead, but in the scene where Venus is teaching him, he conveys the confusion and the uncertainty of being that age actually kind of well. But again, the physical aspect of just his appearance it takes away from...
He doesn't have a youthful face.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it's the biggest part.
Yeah.
It makes it really, really hard to relate to the...
I'm thinking about the kids on The Wire, and but maybe I shouldn't just go there because black show with kids, but just like
Well, you're talking about the season where they focus on the school, right?
Well, any of the seasons, just simultaneously, those kids are scary and scared, right?
Yeah.
And vulnerable and tough.
Attack the Block is another great one. You've got this like really great screen presence from these kids. They own this neighborhood. They are really on top of the game that they're playing, but the game that they're playing is putting them into these unfortunate boxes where they're really vulnerable and then there are aliens.
Yeah. I mean, the problematic stuff doesn't just start and end with Kenny Loggins' sort of appearance. I mean, you've got the big guy being scared of 4 young black boys in the lobby of WKRP. Jennifer, I mean, the look on her face conveys a lot. She doesn't do a lot in that scene, but those boys are checking her out. I mean, very obviously checking her out. And that to me that's a whole other kettle of fish and a really complicated...
Well, hold on. Every male who comes into the office checks her out.
That's true. That's true. But how does that interact with how the big guy reacts to the entire situation? Is my question.
Right. There's sort of it's harmless when the latest traveling salesman ogles Jennifer, but this is playing with a different set of associations when the black quote teens who are actually 30-year-old men dressed like Sha-Na Na.
Right. Well, and let's just take 4 black dudes who are dressed completely normally standing around in an office as something that's completely terrifying, and play it for laughs is like And
then we have that scene with Les where we've been through this Les Venus thing, Rob, so many times in this series, in this show, and Les comes up and does his usual condescending sort of, first we have Bailey, who is the sort of classic sort of condescending liberal, I want to say, who kind of...
Well, okay, so I actually have a note on this
She's
one.
well-meaning.
She's well-meaning, exactly.
So this is from intergroup conflict literature, and the idea is that basically racism manifests in 2 different ways, and one of them is the conservative racism, which is really overt, and, people say the N-word, and they will be hostile to you when you're places. And then there is this sort of soft northeastern, and it's very paternalistic, where you are gonna overcompensate because you want everybody to know how not racist you are. And that actually research finds that that black people are generally made more uncomfortable by that, because it's easier for you to be upfront about who you are than to have this sort of false overcompensating facade, which sort of draws attention to the differences without actually talking. Like it's the space that is about making white people feel comfortable and not about making who you're talking to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So the part that I think probably made Mike and I cringe was Les. And I don't know, he's so cheerful. He's so pleased to be able to tell, to tell that he's learned, that he's really interested in black music. And he makes a point of, he's talking about how all of, America's great cultural contributions, come from African Americans, and American English is the way it is because of African Americans. But, did it sound like any podcasts you might have ever listened to, Mike?
Maybe a little bit.
I just can't help noticing that both you gentlemen are black.
Oh, God.
I've recently taken quite an interest in Negro culture.
Is that right?
You may not know this, Arnold,
Les.
but most of the few truly original contributions this country has made to society have come from black Americans. Take, for instance, the language. Now, I personally think it's stagnating in England, but here in the U.S. it is vibrant and growing. And why? And why?
Why?
Black input, Arnold, that's why.
Well, here's the thing. The interesting thing about that scene, though, is that we find out that, Johnny knew that Arnold was coming to the station and prepped Les. He gave Les these words, this script to say.
He taught him that, and he says, I did. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Well, it was also interesting, too, because taken out of context, if I had not seen the last episode, Les did a pretty good job here, even though he was fed his lines. You know, he's enthusiastic. It's real information. He's talking to somebody who the mission is to convince him to stay in school anyway. So he's got all of these great, like, cultural facts about how to be a contributor. But then you take that in the context of what happened last episode during Frog Story, when he was like, don't you have, what did he, like, it was basically asked him if he knew any voodoo. Like, it was so racist and horrible.
Yeah.
So this isn't a man who knows how to navigate this. It's just a man who's been fed some cool facts that he wants to share.
But I think it's interesting that Johnny knows Les well enough at this point that he knows Les has that paternalistic, condescending thing going on. We've seen it before, and Johnny says, I've got to mitigate Les's like negative impact somehow. Let me give him this script to do in front of Arnold, and that will. It's not going to eliminate Les, but it's going to control the damage that could happen from Les talking to this kid.
I don't know if I don't want to defend Les, but the through line through all of Les's like cluelessness is that he is curious and wants to learn.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Like even when he wanted to do the Black Like Me thing, as terrible as that was, he wants to learn. Way back in the first season, he tells Venus, I've noticed that a lot of athletes are Negroes or something like that. You know, like he's, and it doesn't make it, you know, genuine curiosity.
It's a stark contrast to the fear from the rest of the cast too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. He's not afraid.
No,
That's
not
right.
at all.
He's all cheerful and happy. He's the only one who's not.
Like he would genuinely go out to dinner with these people and be a cultural anthropologist and just like hang out and he would be super stoked on it, but it's still attached to all of this other implicit baggage.
Yeah.
I do like the shout out to Billy Joel.
It's true. And you know, you scratch an Allman Brother and you do get black. So, you know.
Where'd you get the $100 bill?
On the street.
Rolling drunk, selling drugs?
No, man, you got me all wrong.
Yeah, you are a member of a gang, though.
No, it's a social club, you know what I mean? A gentleman's club.
Yeah, you're the president of this gentleman's club.
That's right.
That means you're the strongest and the smartest.
Yeah, I guess so.
You're strong and you're smart. I just want to verify that.
Yeah, I'm strong and I'm smart.
Good. I'm not surprised. So why you want to drop out of school?
It's wasting my time.
Maybe. Main reason is you don't like it, do you?
Yeah, I guess so.
How come?
Because it's wasting my time.
No. You don't like school because you look like a dummy in there.
What are you talking about?
You look like an idiot in class.
A what?
An idiot.
Look out now.
Hey, I'm looking out. I'm looking out. And I see a smart guy who isn't so smart when a teacher asks him a question. It's embarrassing, ain't it?
I wouldn't know.
Oh, yeah, you would. There ain't nobody like to do anything to make him look dumb, and school makes you look dumb.
I run that school, my man.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm not saying you don't, but you don't look good in class, and you don't like it, do you?
You saying I'm dumb?
No. I'm saying you ain't strong.
You want to see just how strong I am, you keep on talking.
So why don't we shift to talking about the storeroom scene? I think it's kind of interesting that this scene actually takes place in a storeroom. First of all, they have to go everywhere in the station, and there's nowhere that can really hold them. Like the bullpen
That's
can't.
beautifully said. I just want they have to go everywhere in their station. There's nowhere that can hold them.
Yeah, and they have
because they don't belong. They've sort of made it very clear that it's weird to have him in the lobby.
Yeah, and it's weird to have him in the bullpen, and they can't get privacy, and so they end up in this storeroom. And and Mandy, this goes right back to what you're talking about when it comes to staging. Like, this is a little 2-hand, 1-act play that happens in this storeroom. Physically, say what you want about Kenny Long, but physically, he does an incredible job. And when we did our research on his age, Rob, we found out he was a dancer.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can see that in the way Arnold kind of paces back and forth as Venus kind of chases him a little bit, and then Arnold kind of intimidates him a little bit, and you have this sort of back and forth kind of dance between the two of them. That's, you know, one person's intimidating the other, one person's trying to, sort of trigger a response in the other. It's the scene itself
really
leading up to the teaching is really well done.
That's really interesting because it shows that Venus is a really good teacher, right? Because when you're a teacher, your goal is to get inside of the perspective of the people you're trying to teach and bring them closer to you. And so that first scene where they're sort of sizing each other up is really him understanding as deeply as possible who this kid thinks he is and where he's coming from so that he can be more effective.
He bounces him back and forth between saying, oh, you're smart, but you feel dumb when you're in class, don't you? And he's able to suss that out almost immediately, you know?
It's not the part of the scene that everyone remembers, but it's as key, if not more impressive and key than the business with the pros and the new boys and the elected ones, is that he does know what's going on with Arnold.
I wanted to give a big shout out to the writers because there's one point where he talks about how Venus is talking about how everything is either survival or conquest. And in it, the kid asks about sex, and Venus says that that's survival. And I was, as a feminist, I was really impressed.
I had the same thought, because wouldn't it have been awful if he had said, well, that's conquest.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was just so nice. It was really beautiful. And then later, he talked about learning as conquest, and it tied it all back in. And it was just so beautiful. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, good. Go Venus. We mentioned back, season 1 that Tim Reed got his start doing comedy. He and the white comic Tom Dreesen, they went together into Chicago high schools to tell kids to stay off of drugs. And they did little comedy sketches and routines that were sort of like stay off of drugs sketches.
Yeah, and Tim and Tom were, for adult audiences, they were doing racially pointed humor. They were doing, again, this is the late 60s, early 70s, so they were touching a third rail at that point that nobody else was doing, and that they were able to bring this into schools and make it educational is pretty astounding, actually.
I can give you the basics of the atom in 2 minutes. You'll understand it perfectly and remember it for months.
2 minutes? You crazy, you know that?
If I can teach you about the atom in 2 minutes, will you go back to school and finish out the year? How about it, huh? Come on, you're a betting man. How about it, Arnold?
Yeah, okay, sure. You got it.
I got your word?
Yeah, you got my word. In 2 minutes.
We got a deal.
Yeah, we got a deal.
All right, sit down. Okay. There are 3 gangs on the street, right?
Yeah, 3 gangs.
And this right here is the territory. Now, here is the neighborhood. Got that?
Yeah.
And right in the middle of this neighborhood is a gang called the New Boys.
Yeah, the New Boys. Good name.
Okay. Out here on the outside of the neighborhood, on the edge of the neighborhood, is another gang. These are real negative dudes. Really negative, right?
Right.
Now, they call themselves the elected ones.
All right, the elected.
You got that? Really negative. They don't like nothing, see?
Right.
Now, they all the time out here circling around the neighborhood, just circling, checking out the New Boys. Now, the New Boys see this, and they get, they figure there's something wrong here, so they make a deal with another gang. A gang of very happy-go-lucky guys. They call themselves the Pros. The Pros.
Yeah, so what do you guys think, Mandy, what do you think of the actual Atom part, the business with the gangs?
So that's really interesting to me because what I'm working on right now has a lot to do with metaphor and post-structuralism and how we use metaphor in education, how the way that we use metaphor in education actually limits our capacity to understand certain ideas. And this actually ties back into the first half of the conversation, because one of the things that Venus says that's really impactful is that the teachers have something that belongs to you and you have to take it. As opposed to they're trying to dump all of this shit information that you don't want into you. They have something that is for you that you have to take. And I have critiques about that for the K through 12 and they're industrial schooling kind of thing, but it's a really pointed statement and a really important idea. And because the gatekeeping of white theory and white academia keeps people from being able to connect on a metaphorical level with the information that's being taught. And so when he takes it and makes it immediately relatable through the use of a metaphor that is relevant to the direct positionality of the student, all of a sudden it just unlocks it. And that's the whole point, is that you can get inside someone's perspective and show them something that will be meaningful for them, and they can carry it with them without it being too complicated or confusing. Because really, most people have the capacity to learn these concepts. It's just that we don't teach them well or right a lot of the time within the frame of the industrial education setting.
Yeah, that's great. I have seen people on the internet carping about the specifics of the physics. Like, well, actually,
Oh, Jesus Christ.
the neutron and the electron don't work like that.
What 16-year-old has the actual understanding? Yeah.
No, but, well, and I think that something about concreteness, even if you're not positioned that way, like this is how I remember the atom structure for the rest of my life. Also,
Yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that the best part of the whole, not the best part of the whole, but the cherry on top of the scene is when we find out that Johnny was not only sleeping in the bullpen, but he was sleeping in the storeroom. And he's like, wow, I never understood the atom before, but I just woke up and I now understand it completely.
He says, can you teach me about magnets?
Yeah, that was great.
That's a great.
So that brings me to an observation that, like Mike and I had at the end of it, which is that, and it ties back to the idea that Mike was talking about, where there's no space that can hold them, right? So they go through this complex labyrinth journey to get to this inner sanctuary. And then Johnny has to safely escort you out, like back into the world of whiteness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's
heavy. I was impressed with the sort of just the setting up that each step of the way, as each time they move into another space, Johnny is already there sleeping and gets up and moves to the next one. So they're actually setting it up.
Skills.
Yeah.
Well, that's Johnny. Yeah, definitely.
But no, absolutely. They're setting it. They're.
It's clever. They set it up
so that they can walk back into the real life. But then, of course, there's the final scene at the end. It's nighttime again, and speaking of spaces, that's the other thing, right? Is that nighttime is when
is a black people
Venus
time.
is when Venus and Cora can talk. It's when Venus has the station to himself. It's when the black people have the station to themselves.
The music,
heavy.
They play black music. But then at the end, it's not a unalloyed happy ending, because she asks him, what do you think it's going to take? Do you think he's going to stay? And he has doubts.
Yeah, he
right?
says the odds are against him.
I think that's good, because it would be glib if he had solved everything in 2 minutes. And I think that Venus can teach Arnold about the atom in 2 minutes, but a much harder thing to do is to
actually mentor him through the next 2 years of high school.
And to have Arnold get to a place where it really does matter to know about the atom.
Well, and that's part of the scene with Venus too, is the idea. Arnold's smart, man. He says I know, I've seen those unemployment lines. There's plenty of dudes with college degrees who are in those unemployment lines. What is this actually going to do for me?
I actually think it's super important the way that they connect up, gang survival and street success with intelligence too. Because that's not
you're the president of your gang, aren't you?
But it is super important because gangs are survival mechanisms. People pool together and they create innovative economies, right? Like there's lots of violence and lots of bad things happening around it, but it is about surviving under an oppressive regime, really, more than anything else.
Absolutely. And I think that's what lets Venus identify Arnold as a smart guy from the very beginning. It's like, oh, you're the head of that gang. You told those guys to go wait downstairs. Like you are the man. You've got $100 bills in your pocket, And to Venus, Arnold shoves that $100 bill at him. It's such an insult. It's like, look at you. You talk white. You work here in the station, but I got more money than you. Go buy a new jacket. That's the power. That's that conquest thing. That it shows how clever Venus is to be able to see all these little tiny aspects of Arnold's personality and then take them holistically as the whole and be able to just turn them right back around.
I'm really sad that Venus isn't a teacher anymore.
Well, let's talk about that, Mandy, because it's expressly called out in the episode that Venus got burnt out on teaching. Like he could only do a few years. He said, and then I was out.
In fact, doesn't he sort of suggest that he somehow failed, that he wasn't a good teacher?
Right. Which that's the perspective of most best teachers is that they've failed. I remember, so my original undergrad was in, I did work in elementary education before I got disillusioned by the system and was like, this is not what I want. I don't want to spend the rest of my life dashing myself against some rocks. And one of the statistics is that the people who are the most innovative and promising teachers generally burn out in 3 to 5 years.
Wow. And that's exactly how long Venus lasted, 3 years.
Yeah. Now, in Venus's defense, he was also a fugitive and a deserter from the U.S. Army.
This is true.
He's a very busy man.
A minor league ball player. And also he was hanging out with Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey.
And he was also a children's TV show host. Yeah, so he had a lot of stuff to get through between 71 and 78. Yeah, definitely.
So 3 years of teaching is about right?
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
But we pitched right back when we were pitching WKRP spin-offs. That was your great idea, Mike, was a spin-off where Venus goes back to teaching after he leaves the station.
3, 2, 1. Contact is the secret, is the moment when everything happens. Contact is the answer, is the reason why everything happens. Contact. Let's make contact. 3, 2, 1. Contact.
So this episode famously won the Humanitas Award, which is an award that was set up in the mid-70s to reward challenging, educational, and otherwise groundbreaking TV programs. And if you look at the Wikipedia page for the Humanitas Award, you just see a cavalcade of MTM and Norman Lear sitcoms, basically. I mean, and again, we've talked about this, Rob. In the 1970s, these TV shows were tackling issues. They were, maybe not every episode, but they were definitely having those very special episodes every now and again that tackled social issues. All in the Family obviously attacked it from that satirical end, but Good Times won a bunch of Humanitas Awards. We've talked about Good Times being problematic in spots as well, but it was a show about a black family in a black ghetto. I mean, it was, at that time, really groundbreaking. And this episode of WKRP won one, and also God Talks to Johnny won one, or was nominated for one.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That's neat. And it really was the sitcoms more than the hour-long dramas that were doing this work in the 70s.
You had Roots in 77. Obviously, that was kind of, a big sea change in tackling these kind of issues. But, this was an era where entertainment took its social responsibility really seriously. And it extends all the way out. I mean, a few weeks ago, we talked with our moms about Sesame Street and the origins of Sesame Street in the late 60s and how Children's Television Workshop tricked kids into learning stuff by making it like commercials, as your mom said.
Yep.
But, in the 1970s, we had an explosion of both big and small educational programming. Everything from The Electric Company and 321 Contact, which were some of my favorites, to TV Ontario series like Parlez-moi and
Read All About It.
Read All About It, exactly. So what happened in the 1980s, Rob? Does this have anything to do with our overarching thesis and Hold My Order about things changing once we get to the Reagan era?
Well, yes, I'm afraid it does. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I think, now, was it Reagan or was it the head of the FCC? Somebody said...
Well, Reagan's head of the FCC was... If you look at a picture of him, I can't remember his name, but he looks like Patrick Bateman, basically.
Yeah, so Reagan appointed a guy to the head of the FCC. His name was Mark Fowler.
Yep.
Fowler was the spearhead for a whole lot of deregulation of telecommunications. Now, to give him his props, Fowler immediately embarked on a campaign to break up the AT&T monopoly.
We've talked about that, yeah.
He has that going for him. But he also wanted to get rid of all these liberal namby-pamby rules about educational children's programming that had come in the 70s. And he famously said, why should TV be regulated any more than any other household appliance? It's just a toaster with pictures.
Jesus.
And
we would like more direct ways to sell and pump propaganda into your home. Why on earth should we worry about how we do that?
Why should we worry about that? Exactly. So this toaster with pictures. So so they got rid of all these. They also slashed caps on station ownerships, which made it possible for big companies, for chains to be bought up and a few companies to own all of the stations.
Clear Channel started there, right? Yeah,
exactly. And they changed the rules about educational programming, about advertising programming, about TV shows that were really advertisements for toys, all these things. And lo and behold, what happens to kids' TV in the 80s? I'll throw that back to you guys.
So the example that I want to use is Strawberry Shortcake.
Oh, yeah.
See, I would have gone with G.I. Joe Transformers. I'm glad we have you on this episode, Mandy. Yeah.
Because Strawberry Shortcake, as a character, was originally made for a series of teen and youth greeting cards. And that was in 1979. And then it was optioned by a toy producer. And then they made it into a television show starting in the 1980s where they would introduce new characters in order to release new dolls. Yeah. And so there was no show. There was just products.
Yeah.
And that Strawberry Shortcake is the most direct example for me because it didn't even start as like a storybook. It just started as a greeting. Like, here's this cute little rag doll with food stuff but look, we can put all sorts of like chemicals in it to make it smell like strawberries for girls, and then we can make blueberry ones, and then we can make kinds of food, and because don't girls love to bake? And also they love dolls.
Yeah. God.
And we can just sell and sell and sell and sell. And actually, a Strawberry Shortcake doll was one of my first dolls, and was like my baby lovey that I had until I was probably like kept it on a shelf somewhere because I shouldn't still have it, but did.
I mean, I was a kid in the 80s. I mean, Rob, you were born too early for the G.I. Joe Transformers sort of Hasbro era, but I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, those cartoons made me buy the toys. I mean, there's no question.
Well, I talked about my younger siblings. My sister had every My Little Pony, and then my brother had all of He-Man and his friends. He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, and those are all exactly the same.
Yeah.
He-Man, She-Ra, and Skeletor, and Hordak, and I think we've already, unfortunately, we've already pulled the trigger on the Simpsons clip about the Mattel Chocobot Power Hour, right? But I mean,
that says it right there, right? I mean, it even has the food thing that you were talking about. I want to make a mention of Mark Fowler. So he was the chairman of the FCC pretty much throughout Reagan's entire 2 terms. And, again, tried to also repeal the fairness doctrine, which, also has to do with like equal time and that kind of thing. But Rob, did you happen to check his Wikipedia page to see where he was born?
No.
Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Uh-oh.
I didn't think maybe.
I didn't know Canadians had it in them. No.
Yeah. Well, they all come down to America.
To be evil?
Exactly.
Well, they can't get any foothold up in Canada.
Actually, our neocons do go down to America.
That's true, yeah.
That is true. We do export our neocons. That's right.
We have enough.
Oh, God.
Times have changed. Our kids are getting worse. They won't obey their parents. They just want to fart and curse. Should we blame the government or blame society?
Or should we blame the images on TV?
No, blame Canada. Blame Canada. For their beady little eyes and flapping heads of full of lies. Blame Canada. Blame Canada. We need to form a full assault. Don't blame me for my son Stan. He saw the darn cartoon and now he's off to join the Klan. And my boy Eric once had my picture on his shelf, but now when I see him it tells me to fuck myself. Well, blame Canada. Blame Canada. It seems that everything's gone wrong since Canada came along. Blame Canada. Blame Canada.
They're not even a real country anyway.
I feel like I've been in class with you two. Jesus, I'm like.
This is really, let's getting 3 educators together is a really, really good time.
Don't call me an educator.
You are an educator. Shut up.
Yeah, sure you are.
I work in museums.
Yeah, this is super fun. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, this was great.
Thanks so much, Mandy. That was terrific. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.